Okay, so get this. We are diving into this whole debate about whether you can actually tell if a black woman is married to a white guy based on her hairstyle.
It's crazy how something like hair can spark such a huge
Yeah,
conversation.
right.
But it really gets into these fascinating questions about cultural expectations and all the pressures that come with them,
Mm,
especially for black women.
totally. And it all started, as usual these days, with this TikTok, like a joke, that you can spot a black woman married to a white man just by her hair. Usually natural, or maybe a wig that's,
Yeah.
not exactly fresh out of the salon.
Exactly. And of course, social media being social media, this just blew up.
Mm.
But it was really interesting to see how many black women, especially those in interracial relationships, were super down to share their experiences and offer some explanations.
Yeah, a lot of them zeroed in on like access to hairstylists. Like if you're a black woman and move to a predominantly white area, finding a stylist who really knows how to work with your hair texture can
I
be
don't think
a
imagine.
whole thing.
Right.
And it's not just about finding a salon, right? It's about the cultural understanding, having a stylist who actually knows how to care for black hair in a way that
Right.
feels.
And like they get you,
Exactly.
like you're not having to compromise.
Yes. And I saw this one comment that really stuck with me. This woman was saying that trying to like rebuild your life in a new place, it shouldn't also mean having to start from scratch with your hair care routine just because there's no one around who knows what they're doing.
100%.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about like this bigger issue of representation,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Within the beauty industry in general. Like if it's already this hard to find someone who can even cut your hair, that says a lot.
Totally. It's about more than just convenience. It's about feeling seen and understood and having your hair needs met without having to compromise.
Yes, without feeling like you have to fit into some mold.
Uh-huh.
But here's where it gets even more interesting. The conversation wasn't just about location or even just about stylists.
Right.
Some women were saying that when they started dating outside their race, it actually took some pressure off.
Yeah, like a lot of the women in those videos talked about not feeling as much pressure to conform to certain beauty standards when their partner wasn't black.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder,
Oh, yeah.
what are the ingrained beliefs about attractiveness within the black community, and why do some black women feel like they have to conform to a certain aesthetic in a way that maybe they don't with partners from other backgrounds?
Especially when it comes to black men, it seemed like. There were a lot of women specifically mentioning the pressure to look a certain way for black partners.
It's so interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
it's like this whole other conversation about beauty standards, but within the black community itself. Like, where do those expectations even come from? What are the historical and societal factors that play into all of this?
It's about time we unpack that, honestly. But okay, speaking of expectations, one thing that I noticed kept coming up in the videos was this whole white man loves my natural hair
Yeah.
narrative.
Like it was a surprise,
Yeah.
right? Like they were expecting less acceptance from
Yeah.
black partners.
Right, exactly. And it's like, why is there this underlying assumption that black women need validation from outside of their race for something as natural and beautiful as their hair?
Right.
Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
It really makes you think, is this internalized bias? Like, have black women been conditioned to believe that their natural hair is somehow less desirable within their own community?
And if so, why? What are the roots of that?
Absolutely. It's definitely not a simple issue. There are so many layers to it. But it is really important to remember that even though these generalizations exist, everyone's experience is different.
Of course, of course. It's not about making some blanket statement, but it's about acknowledging that this is a real conversation that people are having. And maybe, just maybe, we can start to unpack some of those ingrained biases that are still lingering out there.
Because honestly, even these kinds of lighthearted observations that we see on TikTok and whatever, they can actually reveal a lot about societal norms and like power dynamics.
100%.
Yeah.
And speaking of power dynamics, we really have to talk about some of the more problematic assumptions that we've seen popping up in the comments.
Oh boy, yeah.
Like the ones that suggest black women who wear their natural hair or, wigs that are a little less done are only doing it to please their white partners.
Right.
Which is just,
It's a whole other can of worms, honestly.
yeah.
It's super problematic. It's like, attributing a black woman's hairstyle to wanting to please a partner, regardless of their race, disregards her autonomy completely.
Completely.
Which just reinforces these harmful stereotypes.
Exactly. Like we're basically saying that a black woman's appearance is all about catering to someone else's preferences. And that's just not true.
And frankly, it's dangerous.
Right.
because people choose their hairstyles for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
Personal preference, convenience, maybe it's a cultural thing.
Sure, yeah.
But to reduce it down to wanting to please a partner is so simplistic
Totally.
and potentially really damaging.
Because, I mean, let's be real, perpetuating these kinds of stereotypes has real consequences.
Absolutely.
It reinforces the idea that Black women should change how they look to fit into someone else's box.
Exactly.
And that's just not okay.
It all comes back to respect.
Yes.
Respecting someone's individual choice and recognizing that there are all these different factors that influence how a Black woman might choose to style her hair.
So we've got access to stylists, we've got these like internalized beauty standards, and now we've got these potentially really harmful stereotypes. But there's another layer that I think we really need to address, and that's the emotional toll of this whole thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Ugh.
Like, how does this online debate actually make Black women feel? I think that's a really important question.
Right. Because I was seeing comments from women saying that they felt judged, like their hair choices were constantly being scrutinized, especially in the context of interracial relationships.
Which just goes to show how important it is to make space for these conversations and, to acknowledge the emotional labor that goes into navigating all of these really sensitive issues.
It can be really exhausting, to feel like your hair is always up for debate. Like it's this thing that people feel entitled to have an opinion about, even if it has nothing to do with them.
Right. And especially in a way that can feel so personal.
Yeah.
Like you're being judged or analyzed based on something that's like so fundamental to who you are.
Exactly. And it's not just about the external pressure either. I mean, I saw some women in those videos talking about the pressure they were putting on themselves to present a certain image, like especially when they first started dating someone outside their race.
It's almost like this pressure to overcompensate.
Yeah.
To sort of preemptively address any biases that someone might have, even if they haven't even said anything.
Totally. And that's a lot to carry around emotionally. It's like, how do we even begin to unpack all of those internalized beliefs so we can just exist authentically? It's such a good question. And I think it really starts with self-acceptance, right?
Right.
Like challenging those expectations that you've internalized and recognizing that your worth doesn't depend on you conforming to some external ideal.
It's about deciding what beauty means to you on your own terms.
Yeah.
And not letting anyone else define that for you.
Yes, exactly. So much of this comes back to self-love. But, it does make you wonder, this whole online debate, even if it did start as a joke, could it actually have some unintended consequences?
Like what?
Like a chilling effect on interracial dating, maybe?
It's true. I mean, anytime we start digging into these really sensitive topics, there's always a risk that we might actually end up reinforcing the biases that we're trying to dismantle.
Right, exactly.
But I do think that having these conversations, even if they're uncomfortable, is really important. Oh, absolutely. We can't just ignore these issues and hope they'll go away. We have to create spaces where we can talk about these things openly and honestly, and we have to be willing to listen with empathy and keep an open mind, even if we don't agree with everything we're hearing.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to approach it with a lot of humility.
Yes, 100%.
Being willing to challenge our own assumptions and really sit with the discomfort that can come up when we're forced to confront some of the, less comfortable parts of ourselves.
100%.
Yeah.
Discomfort can be a real catalyst for growth, I think. But it's super important to be mindful, too, about how all of this might land for people who are actually navigating these really complex dynamics in their own lives.
Totally. It's one thing to talk about it in the abstract, but it's a whole other thing when you're the one who's actually living it.
Right, exactly.
And we have to be so careful about making generalizations because every relationship is different.
Of course. I mean, interracial relationships are just as diverse as any other kind of relationship.
Totally. And it's really not fair or accurate to paint them all with the same brush. But, for all the scrutiny and the potentially harmful stereotypes we've been talking about, there are also some really positive things that came out of all of this.
Oh, absolutely. Like those messages of empowerment and self-love. It was so inspiring to see all these women using this platform to celebrate their natural hair and just reject those narrow beauty standards that have been imposed on them for so long.
It was really powerful. It's about time that we start questioning where these standards even came from and who they actually benefit.
Yes. It's about time we start creating new ones.
Yeah.
And to see so many women reclaiming that narrative and just celebrating the beauty of diversity.
Yeah.
I mean, what a powerful reminder that even within these discussions that can feel kind of divisive, there can also be space for affirmation and just like radical self-love.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's not forget the educational aspect of all of this, too. I mean, this whole TikTok debate sparked a much bigger conversation about Black hair care,
Right.
about cultural differences and the urgent need for greater representation in the beauty industry, which is something that we've been talking about for a long time.
A long time. And it's something that I think, honestly, social media can be really good for.
Totally.
Like it can be a catalyst for education and change. By sharing their own personal experiences, these women have opened the door for so much more understanding and empathy.
Because knowledge is power, right? These kinds of conversations, even if they do start on social media, they have the potential to create real, meaningful change in the world.
I wholeheartedly agree. By just shining a light on some of these issues that don't always get talked about, we can start working towards a world that's more inclusive and equitable for everyone.
It's pretty amazing, though, when you think about it, to see that kind of solidarity and shared experience, even when it comes from something that can feel so personal.
Right.
And it makes me think about something we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
About how dating outside their race might take some of that pressure off that some Black women feel to conform to a certain set of beauty standards, you know?
It's tricky, though, because it's definitely a nuanced issue.
Yeah.
And we don't want to make it seem like we're making these big generalizations or we're saying one group's standards are somehow better or worse than another's.
Yeah,
but
of course.
I think it does raise some interesting questions,
Oh, yeah.
about how different cultures develop those standards in the first place.
Totally.
What are some of those historical and societal forces that come into play?
Exactly. And it's not about saying that, like you said, one is better or worse than another.
Right.
But it's about recognizing that these standards do exist.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And they have a real impact on how we see ourselves and how we see other people.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's about understanding that cultural context, right?
Yes.
Because beauty standards aren't universal.
Right.
They vary so much across different cultures, and even within those cultures, there are so many different ideas about what's considered beautiful.
Right. And it's about time we expand our definition of beauty, honestly.
Yes.
Challenge this whole idea that there's only one right way to look.
100%. We need to celebrate the diversity of beauty.
Yes.
And recognize that true beauty really does come from embracing what makes each of us unique.
100%. So, I mean, as we're kind of wrapping up this deep dive here, where do we even go from here?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right. Like, what are some real concrete steps we can take to move past these potentially really harmful stereotypes and create an environment not just for Black women, but for everybody that's truly inclusive and empowering?
It's such a big question. I think for me, it starts with awareness.
Right.
Just acknowledging that these biases exist, that these pressures are real.
Yes.
That's the first step towards actually being able to challenge them.
Totally.
And then it's about educating ourselves and each other.
Absolutely. Right.
Having these open and honest conversations, even when they're hard.
Yes.
And creating spaces where everyone feels seen and heard and respected, regardless of what their hair looks like.
Yes, and I think education is such a huge part of that, too.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about understanding the history of all of this. Like, where did these beauty standards come from in the first place, But it's also about really looking at how those standards are perpetuated. Like the media we consume, the images we're constantly bombarded with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to see way more diversity in our media, in our advertising, really in all aspects of our culture.
Yes. Representation matters. I know we hear that all the time.
All the time.
But it's true.
It's so true.
Because it really does shape how we see the world and how we see ourselves in it.
100%. Yeah. And it's not about just checking boxes either.
Right.
It's about really showcasing the beauty of all people.
Yes.
No matter their race, their ethnicity, their body type, their hairstyle.
Yes, exactly.
Whatever it is that makes them who they are.
It's about celebrating that.
Yes.
And creating a world where everybody feels empowered to just show up as their authentic selves.
100%.
And that's a world I want to live in. This whole conversation, it actually reminds me of this quote by Audre Lorde. She said, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare."
Oh, I love that quote.
Right. So good.
It's so powerful.
And I think it really speaks to the importance of self-love and self-acceptance, especially for Black women, as like acts of resistance
Yes.
against all of these societal pressures and expectations.
100%.
Yeah.
Like how you choose to present yourself to the world, it's a form of self-expression.
Yes.
And it can be such a powerful statement, honestly.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a message I think we all need to hear a little more of.
Yes.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the question I want to leave everyone with is this. How can we all, and I mean everybody, challenge this idea that a Black woman's hair is somehow up for debate?
Is the question, right?
It's not about us to analyze or interpret or, God forbid, scrutinize.
Right.
It's her hair. It's her choice. And that's that.
100%.
So let's all do our part to keep this conversation going, but in a way that's constructive, with empathy and understanding.
Yeah.
Because like we were talking about, we really do have the power to create a world that's more just and equitable for everyone.
Couldn't agree more.